Well, hello once again, and welcome to In Conservation With. My name is David Lindo, and In Conservation With is sponsored by the Diputación de Cáceres, which is a tourist board looking after the northern region of Extremadura in southwest Spain, and an amazing place for watching birds, and also a place where I've actually glimpsed ring ouzels, and by Leica Sport Optic as well. So thank you very much, guys. And tonight, well, this afternoon, even wherever you are in the world, I'm very, very happy to have my guests, Vic Fairbrother and Kendrick Hutchinson, otherwise Ken to his friends, I presume.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good, good. Now, you guys have written this really incredible book about my favorite bird on the planet. It's not even in Britain or Europe, on the planet. And before I even go any further, let me just tell you why it is my favorite before we start talking to the guys. And that is when I was around about 7, I found this book in a library, Birds of Britain, Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. And at that point, I was deeply into birding, but I had no mentors, so I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. And sparrows were baby birds, starlings, mummy bird, blackbirds, daddy bird, that kind of thing. And I remember thumbing through. I mean, I read this book inside out, back to front, sideways, and I knew every single species. But when I came to the plate with the blackbird and ring ouzel on it, I was drawn to the ring ouzel. I was thinking, wow, wow. And I remember reading about it, and I realized by reading, even at that young age, that the ring ouzel was a very, very, very different beast to the blackbird. And also realized that it was found in some of the more wilder areas of Britain, in the western and northern edges of Britain. And I thought to myself as a kid, when will I ever get to see one? Who's going to take me to the Cairngorms or Dartmoor or Yorkshire or, Snowdonia? Because no one did take me anywhere. And it was many years until I actually saw my first one. And I must admit, my first one was a bit of a disappointment. I saw one flash past me when I was on the island of Corfu on a sort of a holiday. And then I twitched another one on the Isles of Scilly, which again was a bit disappointing. But one day, about 16 years ago now, in my patch, I mean, I was living in London at that point, and my local patch was Wormwood Scrubs in West London. I remember one night in April having a dream. I dreamt that I found a ring ouzel on my patch, and I thought to myself when I woke up in the morning, that's impossible. I've only ever seen two. I've never seen any in Britain. There's been none recording in London. There's no way I'm going to see one. But I went to my local patch and I walked around that morning, and I remember seeing quite a few common migrants like common white throat and even wheatear, I think. It was a grey, dull day, and I remember walking back to the car, and I turned round for some reason, and as I did, something dark flew across my head and landed about maybe 50 or 60 meters from me. I put my binoculars up, and there, filling the whole view, was an adult male ring ouzel. I couldn't believe it. My favorite bird had come to see me because he knew that I couldn't go and see him. And basically, from that time onwards, every year I would see a ring ouzel, even if it's just for a minute. I'll see one passing through, and it's been amazing. And I'll talk more about my connection with ring ouzels later. But this is not about me tonight. It's about Vic and Ken. So welcome, gentlemen. The thing is, you two have obviously worked a long time on ring ouzels, but I just want to find out about you as people before we actually talk about your work. So, as I can see, Ken, tell me about how you first developed the love for watching birds and when did ring ouzels enter your life?
Well, it was very early on, I suppose, when as a boy, I was probably about 8 years old, that sort of thing. And my father, who was quite a great naturalist, really, he took me onto the moors above the place where I lived in West Yorkshire. And there was this bird which was piping away in the distance, and he stopped and said to me, "That's a ring ouzel. It's a sign that spring has arrived." And that's always stuck in my mind to this day. This magical bird, which was piping away across the high moors. And that was a sign that spring was just around the corner. So that stayed with me, really, from that day. And I suppose I've had a love of the uplands and birds from that very young age. So the uplands of this country are very special to me, and that is the habitat of the ring ousel. So I suppose when I decided to make a study of a single species, shortly after I retired, 20 plus years ago now, the ring ousel was a natural sort of bird to choose as that subject. And so that's where it all really began, from those distant memories of my father telling me that there was a ring ousel piping across the distant moor, to the decision to follow the ring ousel and study it in depth.
Fantastic. And how about you, Vic?
Well, like Ken, I'd always been interested in natural history, but like a lot of people, getting married and starting a family and getting stuck into a career, it tended to take a bit of a backseat. But eventually I got back into birding and joined the BTO and was very active in bird surveys. And that was something that really interested me. And just before we embarked on this, I went to a one-day conference at Durham University about upland birds. And it was mainly about raptors. But there was one talk by Chris Rowley from Dumfries and Galloway expressing great concern about the decline of the ring ousel. And he announced that they were thinking of starting a study group to learn more about the ousel and what might be causing the decline and what we might do about it. And so I left my contact details, and eventually he got back to me and said there'd been one other volunteer from North Yorkshire, and he put me in touch with Ken, who I'd never met before. And that started what eventually became this 20-year saga, which has been the most wonderful experience, really.
Well, it comes across in the book. I mean, looking through that book, it's so much detail there. And I found a lot of information that well, most of it I never knew about ring ousels. And it's really brilliant that you guys, have written something like this. And in fact, I must congratulate you on your recent accolade, which is the Marshall Award for Local Ornithology, which the British Trust for Ornithology awarded you with. And it's an award, for those who don't know, which is given to a bird club or group that publishes a book or completes a study or conducts any other exceptional activity in the preceding calendar year that advances the knowledge about birds. I mean, it says a preceding calendar year. You should have got it for the last 20 years then, for your dedication towards that. What was it like picking up that award?
Well, you, Vic. I mean, we were just absolutely dumbstruck, really. The last thing we ever expected us to receive an award. But when you suddenly realised that it was for real and we actually got the award, it was rather nice. We felt quite humbled, and we also felt that it was an award for a lot of other people who helped us over those years in our study. So, yeah, it was an honour, but humbling at the same time.
Yeah, fantastic.
It was also very appropriate, David, that it took place at the Mall Galleries in London on the occasion of the opening of the annual Society of Wildlife Artists exhibition. And it was a superb evening, and enhanced by the fact that we were surrounded by wonderful pieces of artwork about natural history. So it was a really, really special occasion for us. But as Ken said, totally unexpected.
Oh, that's fantastic. Most people, talk about totally unexpected, most people, when it comes to ring ousels, haven't seen them, especially certainly in this country, in Britain. And if you have seen them, the experience you have is normally of birds on passage, like me, for example. Most of the birds I've seen have been passing through London, actually, as opposed to being in the middle of the Cairngorms or in Yorkshire or whatever. So it'd be really fascinating to find out what a ring-ouzel is and how it ticks. So I believe this is a point where we might as well dive into your presentation so we can find out about this evocative wild bird, and also to learn more about your work and, of course, about the book.
Okay, then, David. Well, I'll press the share, and
there you go.
That
perfect.
Is that working?
Looks good.
Yeah.
Well, we've been studying the ring-ouzel on the North York Moors for over 20 years, and it's not easy for unknown authors to have local or regional studies published. So we're immensely grateful to Whittles Publishing for making our findings in this book available to a wider audience. Our study is, of course, just a small part in the wider efforts by the ring-ouzel study group to coordinate monitoring of this red-listed species, promote understanding and awareness of its decline, and the need for conservation action. It's a member of the thrush family, and as a summer visitor joins the resident song thrush, mistle thrush, and blackbird to form a quartet of regular breeding thrushes in the UK. The redwing and fieldfare are primarily winter visitors and passage migrants, and are classed as rare breeding birds here. The ring-ouzel appears very similar to the blackbird, with the males having the same sooty black plumage. However, ring-ouzels have this trademark distinctive white crescent or gorget across the upper breast and diagnostic silver wing panels. When the bird is viewed at a distance and the gorget is not visible, the wing panels are a useful identification feature. Closer examination reveals that the underparts have fine scaling, and the long tail and narrow pointed wings give a sleeker, more elegant appearance than the blackbird and provide a further visual identification aid in the field. Females, like their blackbird counterparts, have brownish black plumage and appear much duller than the males. They have creamy gorgets that are much paler than the male's dazzling white bib. The female's gorget varies from faint, rather muddy crescents to larger, creamy gorgets, and may seem to become whiter with age and successive molts. We have found that some females, perhaps older birds, have remarkably distinctive gorgets, and at a distance and in varying light conditions can be easily mistaken for males. Juveniles show very little sign of a gorget, but do have the distinctive pale look to the wings and the scaling on the underparts. There are three races of ring-ouzel: Torquatus, Alpestris, and Amicorum. This map shows their distribution and range, and winter distribution is shown in blue. The ring-ouzel which breed with us on the North York Moors are the nominate race Turdus torquatus torquatus, and they breed in Scandinavia and northwest Russia, as well as in the uplands of Britain and Ireland. They winter in southern Spain and northwest Africa, especially in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco and Algeria. Alpestris, which breeds in Central and Southern Europe, is unlikely to be seen in Britain, but is of particular interest because they winter in the south of their breeding range or in Northwest Africa, thus largely overlapping with the winter range of British, Irish, and Fennoscandian birds. Amicorum breeds in the mountains of Southwest Asia and east to northern Iran. They are believed to winter in Iran and southern Turkmenistan and are even less likely to be seen here in Britain. This is the tree nesting Alpestris, photographed by Arnaud Barras, who recently completed a PhD on his ring-ouzel studies in the Valais in Switzerland. The status of ring-ouzel in Europe was assumed to be stable during the early years of our study, and as they wintered together, the decline here was assumed to be a UK-only problem. But in 2007, I was on holiday in Pontresina in southwest Switzerland, enjoying the alpine flora, when I chanced upon a local bird atlas which noted that 3 migratory species, including the ring ouzel, had declined in that area. I reported this to the study group in 2008, and the following year, Rito Spar of the Swiss Ornithological Institute attended our annual meeting in Penrith and confirmed the Swiss decline. Successive atlases confirmed the long-term decline in numbers and range of ring ouzels in Britain. It's not an easy bird to survey, and the atlases only showed status at 10-kilometre level. The need for more detailed information led to 2 dedicated ring ouzel surveys in 1999 and 2012. This second survey provided a revised UK estimate of only 5,332 territories, a decline of 29% since 1999. It is also a matter of some concern that several of the English populations, including that on the North York Moors, are comparatively small and isolated. Since the study began, they have ceased to breed on Exmoor, the Long Mynd in Shropshire, and are on the brink on Dartmoor, with only 1 breeding pair confirmed in 2021. One of our aims was to discover the number and distribution of ring ouzels on the North York Moors. Despite the size of the national park and relative inaccessibility of many of the potential breeding areas, in 2010, we estimated a population of 44 to 65 pairs. The National Survey in 2012 used a different model, but produced a very similar population estimate of 64, which was then 55.1% of the English population. Very early in the study, we decided to concentrate our main nest monitoring and breeding behaviour study in Rosedale, which is indicated by the red dots on the map. This dale held a good number of ouzels and was relatively easy of access. Ring ouzels are amongst the earliest migrants to have returned to Britain. And during the early years of the study, they tended to return to Rosedale during the 4th week in March. In fact, first arrivals in the first decade were all between the 24th and 30th of March. The first indication of a possible trend towards earlier arrival occurred when the first arrival in 2011 appeared on the 23rd of March, followed in 2012 by another record, a first arrival on the 21st of March. This early trend has continued with further arrivals on 21st, 22nd, 24th, 22nd, and 24th of March. There can be shocks, though, for us and the ouzels. This is 2 weeks after they had arrived. Irregular weather events are a major factor in varying arrival times and need to be considered in attempting to assess the effects of climate change. The latest date recorded for a first arrival during the study is the 2nd of April, and this late arrival in 2007 was due to adverse weather conditions on the continent, which also held up many other migrant species. This painting of an ouzel in full song is one of many by Jonathan Pomeroy, which adds so much to the visual appeal of the book. Soon after they arrive, the males begin to sing to attract a mate and to establish a territory. W.H. Hudson in 1923 observed that the sound has intrinsic beauty, but its charm is mainly due to the place you hear it in, the wildness and solitude of the rocky glens or mountainside. One of the many delights during the study was getting to know and beginning to understand the simple and complex songs of the ring ouzel. As well as simple and complex song, we became familiar with alarm calls, counter singing, and eventually confirmation of local dialects. We can now hopefully listen to a ring ouzel singing. One of our key tasks was to identify as many breeding territories as possible, and this chart shows the number of territories located in the study area during 2000 to 2018. You can see that there was an average of about 14 pairs per year. It was interesting that these annual fluctuations usually mirrored those in Glenclooney in Scotland. We were very concerned at the end of 2009, in the middle of the chart, at an apparent gradual downward trend since 2002-03. It was therefore a great relief when the upward trend began in 2010. Sir Edward Gray, in The Charm of Birds, observed that eggs are interesting, curious, and often beautiful, but more wonderful are nests. The skill of some nest building birds is extraordinary. The skill deserves both praise and wonder. There are very few published accounts of ringousel's nest building, something we have observed in part on 7 or 8 occasions during our study. On one occasion in Rosedale, we were able to record the development of one nest as it was built over 4 days, commencing on the 23rd of April, the first egg being laid on day 5. The above sequence is an important addition to the literature. This chart shows first egg laying dates in 5-day intervals. Early nests are shown in red and late nests are in yellow. Replacement nests following the loss of early nests are shown in green. The peak period for egg laying you can see in early nests is in the 3rd week in April, and the peak for late nests similarly in the 3rd week in May. The Most Perfect Thing, a book by Tim Birkhead, describes the full wonder and fascination of eggs. In a sample of 104 nests in the study area, we found 89 had 4 eggs, 9 had 5 eggs, and 6 had 3 eggs. Finding nests like the ones above always provide a thrill. The egg colour can vary considerably from the more usual pale blue-green to a quite striking bright blue. The degree of speckling is also noticeably variable, often light and fairly evenly distributed, but sometimes quite heavy and may be concentrated at one end. In the book, nest monitoring details and the full breeding history at each site are described under several quite distinctive habitats. These include gorges, quarries, mines, cuttings, tracksides, and sloping and level ground. This photograph chronicles an amazing chance experience: a newly hatched chick, still egg-shaped, and another egg just beginning to crack. As late as 1994, Appleyard commented on the absence of reliable published data on ringousel incubation and nestling periods because of the difficulty in getting firm dates for egg laying and hatching. He quotes 5 cases where it was 12 days, 2 of 13 days, and 3 of 14 days. Unless a female is discovered nest building, the likelihood of finding a nest on the day of the first egg is laid is rather remote. We only have actual first egg hatching dates for 7 nests in Rosedale, 4 clutches hatched after 13 days, and 3 clutches after 14 days incubation. Fledging is the next key moment in the breeding cycle. It's not often that we're able to obtain both actual hatching and fledging dates for a nest. Chicks may leave the nest prematurely if disturbed, and for this reason, we try to avoid approaching nests immediately prior to the expected fledging dates. Of 16 nests, 8 clutches fledged after 13 days, 6 after 14 days, and 2 after 12 days. Ringousels are described as usually double brooded, and pairs that nest early have the opportunity to rear a second brood, but not all do so. If a first brood is lost, there may not be time for 2 more attempts. There will also be a cost to the female in laying 2 clutches of eggs and rearing 2 broods prior to the rigours of another migration. The location of double broods at Sturdy Bank in 2008, 2010, and 2011 can be seen here. Distances are 30, 53, and 114 metres apart. We've monitored 30 double broods in Rosedale, and the mean distance between first and second broods was 92 meters. 17 pairs fledged young from both nests. One significant human impact is in the study area is managed for grouse shooting by the Spawnton and the Rosedale and Westerdale estates. This obviously involves the controversial control of predators and heather burning. The proposal to ban driven grouse shooting could pose serious problems for ring ouzels and upland waders, depending on what landowners decided to do with their estates. It is not easy life being an upland farmer, but they do play an important part in creating suitable conditions for ring ouzels to breed. In Rosedale, grazing sheep are a key factor in maintaining the necessary mosaic of short grass where ouzels can easily feed on earthworms, beetles, leather jackets, and other adult and larval insects not too far from their nests. Changes in grazing regimes can seriously affect ring ouzels. The RSPB has been conducting habitat management trials at 2 of their reserves, where changes in grazing regimes had adversely affected ouzels. The removal of sheep had led to the loss of short grazed feeding areas at Geltsdale, and 2 heavier grazing at the Dovestone Reserve had reduced nesting habitat. Today, our lovely valley and the village of Rosedale depends upon farming, shooting, and the summer visitor for its livelihood. For a limited period in the 19th century, it was the scene of a flourishing mining industry. So valuable was the ironstone of Rosedale that nearly 20 miles of standard gauge railway were built to transport this mineral wealth over the highest part of the North York Moors to the ironworks of County Durham. The disused railway track is now a popular route for walkers and cyclists. Another human impact, and because it follows the 300 to 350 metre contour just above the tree line, it also provided excellent access for our ring ouzel survey. This heritage, though, does more than to provide good access. This diagram shows the topographical features chosen for nest locations in the Rosedale study area. Natural features such as heather slopes, gullies, gorges, and level ground account for only 46% of nest sites. Sites of industrial activity accounted for 56%. 24% were in quarries, 21% in cuttings or at track sides, and 11% in a mine shaft. This close affinity with the industrial heritage and the increased exposure to the presence of people was a surprise. It is extremely frustrating when many days have been spent locating and monitoring a nest to find that it's been predated. It's even more devastating for the ring ouzel, of course. In the example above, it was most depressing to lose 2 ouzel nests in close proximity at the entrance to Wrekin Gill in 2014. The predator is not known, but magpies had been present in the area on a number of occasions, and one was observed nearby, first sparring with a lapwing, and then landing on the path leading up from the track, where it devoured a downy lapwing chick. As Ian Newton has described, many species produce more chicks than required for a population to remain stable, so it is not a simple matter to determine the impact of predation. In studies where predation has been shown to reduce the breeding density of their prey, it was ground nesting birds, vulnerable to a wider range of predators, that were mostly affected. These are some of the potential predators. Many stoats are trapped to reduce their impact on grouse, but they're also prolific breeders. Watching them scour the sides of the dale, it seems incredible that any ground nesting species survive. Adders are not a major threat, but we do report an example of a ring ouzel attacking an adder in the study area. Kestrels are usually resident in Rosedale, but we do not have any confirmed examples of predation here. One pair of kestrels nested in Wrekin Gill just 50 meters from a ring ouzel nest, from which 3 young fledged in 2009. This photograph captures a ring ouzel carrying food to a nest in the mine shaft at Sheriff's Pit. Earthworms are the commonest component of an ouzel, chick diet, followed by a wide variety of beetles. Many other adult insects and their larvae are also taken, providing nutritious food for young chicks. First-year survival is a problem. When discovered, newly fledged chicks usually freeze. This startled youngster reveals something else for which the following account offers an explanation. The female flew over to the east side near the top of the gill and fed a fledgling with bilberries. She was clearly seen picking bilberries, then going a short distance, just a metre or so, to feed the fledgling. The fledgling was partly visible and flapping wings. She repeated this twice more before flying off towards East Mines. In July, as any second brood fledglings join the first brood juveniles in the search for food, there is a change in feeding and foraging behaviour. Scans of recent grassy feeding areas seldom reveal an ousel, as they now seek cover under the rapidly growing bracken and the patches of deeper heather and bilberry during their molt. It is now, as local fruit sources ripen, that adults and juveniles begin to forage increasingly for ripe bilberries, crowberries, cowberries, and later rowan berries. These all provide the higher sugar content, part of the requirement to fuel the rapidly approaching demands of migration. This is a photograph of a recent arrival from North Africa. Their feathers have to be in first-class condition for the long flight here from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. Britain also provides vital stopover sites for migrants which breed far to the north. This chart shows the spring passage along the Yorkshire coast in 5-day intervals from the 21st of March to the 15th of May, and relates to Fennoscandian birds heading for their northern breeding grounds. The period between 10th and 24th of April coincides with initial nest building and early first egg laying dates of local breeding birds here in the study area. There is also a regular small inland passage through the study area, and it's interesting that the foraging areas used by local breeding birds provide regular stopover sites for birds still moving to breeding grounds further north. The time pressure on birds breeding in the far north must be considerable. This shows autumn passage along the Yorkshire coast in 5-day intervals. You'll see there's a noticeable passage throughout October with the peak from 11th to the 15th. There is then a trickle of records in most years until the middle of November, very occasionally into late November and December. Occasional records of some late winter birds may have overwintered. Might they stop at migrating? Recent Durham University research indicates that some migrants are spending longer in Europe. The first two maps here from the Migration Atlas show locations in autumn and then winter of ring ousels present in Britain during the breeding season. The third map shows recovery locations and movements of ring ousels ringed in Britain during February and May. Most recoveries are of dead birds, and locations are heavily biased towards areas of southern Europe, where trapping and shooting is intense, and especially in southwest France. These routes are, of course, used by many other species. Note the route via Italy. Colouring has been only a very minor part of our study. In 2015, we had the opportunity to acquire some yellow rings with black lettering from a discontinued project. 35 chicks were colouring by T's Ringing Group in 2015 to 18. The long-running colour ringing project of the larger Glenclooney population had established low return rates, so our expectations were duly kept in check. It was some encouragement that we had sightings of single returning males in 2016, 17, 18, and 21. In 2014, a light level geolocator fitted to an adult ousel from Glenclooney revealed that it left Aberdeenshire on the 4th of October and was in the Bordeaux region on the 13th of October, where it stayed for 17 days. It arrived in the Atlas Mountains by the 31st of October or 1st of November, where it stayed for another 4 months. It left there on the 4th of March and was back in Glenclooney on the 6th of April. In 2019, improved global positioning system tags revealed that another Glenclooney bird left northwest England on the 6th of October and was in Galicia, northwest Spain, on the 8th of October, suggesting that it may have crossed the Bay of Biscay. It then stopped off in southern Spain before moving on to the high Atlas Mountains. Similar stopover points were used on the return journeys. In the future, it's hoped that satellite tag technology will reduce the size and weight of devices needed so that they can be fitted to ouzels, with no need to recapture, more precise locations, and the potential for the devices to last beyond 1 year. There's growing need for more research into the winter survival of the ring ouzel in Spain and North Africa. 1 or 2 early visits are described, and Ryland Briggs confirmed a strong association with the availability of Phoenician juniper and water. Ring ouzels need to drink regularly whilst feeding on juniper and other berries, and locations where the birds were found were always within a few hundred meters of a water source. Climate change models predict both a northerly and upward altitudinal shift for ring ouzels. This is not good news for the North York Moors population. This chart shows the elevation above sea level of nest sites in the study area. Almost 70% of nests were found in a 50-meter band between the 300 and 350-meter contour. It's important to note that the highest point on the North York Moors is only 454 meters, and in the study area, just over 400 meters. In Rosedale, the rowan tree resource is very thinly scattered. Many of the trees are old, and the sheep and rabbit grazing, which is otherwise beneficial, means that there is little natural regeneration. Following discussions with staff at the Land of Iron project, a 5-year heritage lottery-funded project, a small-scale tree planting project was implemented to help to ensure a continuing supply of rowan berries for the switch to feeding on fruit in a critical period prior to migration each year. The ring ouzel in the UK, and especially here on the North York Moors, faces an uncertain future. We can take some satisfaction from the fact that the behaviour and distribution of this fascinating bird on the North York Moors has been documented in detail for the first time and now provides a comparative benchmark for any future studies. This long-term study has also been a modest but important part of the wider work of the ring ouzel study group and has contributed some new findings to the published accounts of ring ouzel behaviour in the UK.
And that's the end of the presentation.
Fantastic. I mean, you should have talked about this bit as well, because it's amazing to get the award. But yeah, absolutely fascinating and full of really interesting information. And I'm sure that there's going to be lots of questions thereafter. I mean, one question I have for you guys, why do you think the population of ring ouzel has been generally decreasing, not only in the UK, but in Europe as well?
It's very difficult to decide, David. It's often more than one factor that causes a decline. They can withstand one problem, but when you get a combination of factors, the ringing returns from Glenclooney, as we mentioned, show that adult return rates are not very good and juvenile return rates are extremely low. And as with many species, the disappearance of suitable habitat is a major problem. And that looks as though it's going to continue. And of course, climate change, as we mentioned, doesn't bode well for upland birds in Britain.
You talked about managed. I mean, a lot of the area you were surveying was managed land, I suppose, in inverted commas, for grouse shooting. Do you think that by eliminating predators like stoats and birds of prey, is that helping the ring ouzel to survive better? Or do you think that if it was a natural area with no management from humans, would there be a difference, do you think, in terms of success and productivity?
It's hard to say. There is a moor not far from our study area, which is managed without grouse shooting, but ring-ouzels don't nest there, unfortunately. It doesn't seem to be ideal for them. I mentioned stoats. I mean, they do breed prolifically. And it seems that reducing the number of magpies and stoats and so on will help. But as I understand it, these mammals and predators, they fill a vacuum, don't they? You know, if you killed 20 stoats, well, it doesn't leave a place without any stoats at all. Others move into the area. So I'm not really sure what I don't know what you think, Ken, what the complete, I love seeing stoats, for instance, but I'm horrified if I see one scouring the dale close to a ring-ousel nest we've been monitoring for a long time. So I think we all have double standards, you know. I'm quite pleased perhaps if the gamekeeper culls a few stoats and it keeps a few more of our chicks alive, but it's difficult.
I think certainly the number of stoats which are shot in Rosedale alone, it's an incredibly high number. I mean, the gamekeeper did tell me quite a few years ago that typically each year they're killing something like 80 or more stoats annually in just Rosedale, which is a dale, a valley, which is 6 miles from top to bottom and about 1.5 miles wide. That's a lot of stoats in a year. But I don't think there's any doubt that it's helping ground nesting birds by keeping on top of these predators. But I mean, stoats and weasels and brown rat are just one of a number of predators. There's the magpies, which we talked about. There's crows, a lot of crows around. So, you know, there's aerial predators as well as ground predators. But I think and we mentioned this in our book, that there is a place called Longmynd in Shropshire where the population of ouzels is completely gone. It's now extinct on the Longmynd in Shropshire. And there was absolutely no doubt that was down to being an unkeepered moor, and the predators just allowed to run wild, and that was really the end of the ring-ousel. And a number of other ground nesting birds on the Longmynd also were seen to be suffering from the fact that the moor was unkeepered. So gamekeepers do have a benefit, much as we're led to believe that they don't, but they do have a benefit. And we've had a very good relationship with our gamekeepers on Rosedale over the years, and we've found them extremely helpful.
You talked about in your presentation the long migration that these birds do. I mean, it's incredible to think that, you know, the birds that we see in Yorkshire, you know, in Snowdonia and other places where they still cling on, are spending their winters in magnificent vistas. Not saying that Yorkshire isn't, of course, but magnificent vistas in the Atlas Mountains. Do you think that journey is also contributing to their demise? I mean, obviously you talked about the hunting in southwest France, and also I'm in Spain and I know of people, you know, the people out there shooting thrushes all the time, and they often shoot other species of, you know, for example, recently eyebrow thrush was shot in northern Spain. So is hunting also taking its toll, do you think?
I'm sure it is. And it's something we don't have much control over, do we?
Yeah, I think the interesting point about the one ring-ousel which had a geolocator fit to it, which spent 17 days in France and western France, there was clear evidence that there was quite a number of reported ring ringoursels being located in that area, which was felt as though it was probably as a result of birds which had been shot, and therefore the rings recovered. So there is a suggestion there that maybe shooting does play a part in the number of ringoursels which are starting to decline.
Do you think, I mean, your study's been incredible, and I must say to Zoomers and anyone else watching this, you need to buy that book. It's fascinating, and you know, we'll talk about some of the elements of it in a second. But what is the overall general picture for the future? I mean, let's look in the past for a minute. What was the population like in the past? You know, before your study,
the first problem we had was that there was no information. The standard book by Nelson on the birds of Yorkshire, 2 volumes, it mentions ringousels, but it's all passage birds. There's no mention of breeding on the North York moors at all. So they were very poorly studied on the North York moors. But I mean, historically, early atlases showed that the ringousel was at much lower altitudes in Britain and was much more widespread. And with most declines, it's a question of retreat to better habitat and safer habitat. And this is going on, you know, as we showed with the atlases, that the breeding areas are becoming more fragmented. But certainly ouzels were far, far more abundant than they are now, and much more widely distributed. And the future, to be honest, doesn't look good. There are many more birds in Scotland, and they may be able to withstand the pressure for much longer. But as we mentioned, with Longmynd and Exmoor and now Dartmoor threatened, in a way we'll be next in line as the most easterly and isolated population. But who knows, for over the 20 years, which in one way seems a long time for a study, but in relatively it's a very short space of time. I just hope it continues for as long as possible, David.
Just to add to that, there was a wonderful book published in 1890, called 40 Years in a Moorland Parish, written by the Vicar of Danby. Danby is only a few kilometers north of Rosedale. And the vicarage there is on around about the 200-meter contour. So it's quite a high parish on the North York moors. But the vicar there reports in his book seeing hundreds of ringousels, and he's cursing them because they're coming down from the moors and attacking his fruit cages. And they're taking these fruits from his garden, and he's really cursing this bird. But he does say they are in the hundreds. So there's anecdotal evidence there that back in the late 19th century, ringousels were a lot more common than what they are now. And I think it's generally sort of accepted that the decline of the ringousel started at the beginning of the 20th century. And from that point onwards, it's been a downhill sort of slope. But here we are, 40 years in Moorland Parish, published 1890, saying that ringousels was very, very common in that area of the North York moors.
Vic mentioned earlier about Exmoor and other places having threats. Can you quickly just explain what threats are they under and why that could affect you as well?
Well, it's just the general decline, that they were small and isolated populations, and with poor adult return rates and poor juvenile survival, if it's a big population, then they can cope with that. But once you get down to 20 pairs, 10 pairs, 8 pairs, then the other pressures like predation and poor return rates, they just finish them off, you know. And as Ken said, the population on the Longmynd reached such a low stage that any predation at all was terminal. And I think that's happened in Exmoor, and it looks as though it's happening in Dartmoor. I mean, I hope Dartmoor picks up next year, you know, but down to one pair, as far as we know this year, is very, very depressing, because they've done a lot of work in Dartmoor monitoring these birds. But there's no sign at the moment on the North York Moors that we're reaching that critical stage. But we showed on the map of territories that for one period there was a decline, and it had got down to about 10 pairs, and we were wondering, is this the long mind happening again? But then they picked up and reached even higher levels than previously. So there are annual fluctuations. And the other point, of course, is that the alpestris in Europe is doing much better. They're tree nesting. Now, whether that helps, I mean, ground nesting birds in our uplands are much more vulnerable to predators. But even on the continent, as I mentioned, Switzerland was the first place that we noticed where they were declining. I now hear that in Czechoslovakia that there's a decline, and some of the data from some of the countries is described as only medium or poor quality. So we're not always sure how good the monitoring, how detailed the monitoring is, but certainly they're much better in the Alps than they are in Britain.
I think it's just just to repeat those numbers we showed in the slide presentation, that the adults don't live for more than about 3 years. So you're going to only get about 2, maybe 3 breeding seasons out of an adult. And given that just under 50% of adults will return, and less than 5% of juveniles will return for the first breeding season, you have potentially a serious situation there. I'm just taking the other point, which Vic mentioned briefly there. 2009, we were down to 9 breeding pairs in Rosedale, and it looks as though that trend was going to go down, and just to lose a population within a matter of years. But interesting enough, 2010 and 11 and 12, they suddenly shot up to something like 20 breeding pairs in Rosedale. So that does show that they can recover very quickly from a situation which looks as though it's terminal. They can actually turn around and within a matter of 3 years bounce right back again. And that's been, I think, that our finding over the last 20 plus years of studying the ring ousel in Rosedale, it's a cyclical sort of thing with that bird. You get peaks and you get troughs, and you get peaks and you get troughs. The average over the 20 plus years in Rosedale is 14 breeding pairs, and that's exactly the number we recorded this year. So interesting figures there, but need to be aware that you know, it's not a very long-lived species, and apart from one in Scotland, which I think was dubbed the super ousel, which lived for about 10 years. Most ring ousels don't see more than 2 or 3 breeding seasons.
There are other points in answer to your question, David, and that is human interference. We don't have any recent evidence of egg taking, but there was a case in County Durham of someone fitting close rings to birds with an obvious intention of taking them and selling the chicks. Luckily, that guy was identified and prosecuted. In the Peak District, they had problems with other activities, one of which was rock climbing, and Stanage Edge, which is a popular place for rock climbers. Ousels also nested there, but that was a success story in that the warden and the Mountaineering Club got together, and each year they would identify routes, and those routes were closed for the duration of the breeding season. And climbers were brilliant in honouring this, and that was a success story really in avoiding problems. But the Peak Peak District also suffers from huge numbers of tourists and increasingly difficult behaviour for ouzels to cope with. Another factor I touched on is with climate change raising its head, there's huge pressure now to plant more trees. And lots of the uplands have, in theory, been identified as, oh, these huge open spaces, you know, just grass there and sheep. Clear the sheep off and plant lots of trees and everything will be wonderful. But of course, in doing this, there needs to be careful assessment of what effect you're having on other creatures and other birds. And certainly in Rosedale, if it was covered with trees, then it would be goodbye to the ring ouzels and the curlews and lapwings and the snipe and lots of other things. So its habitat pressure is of one kind or another, and our impact, they both have huge implications for not only ouzels, but all breeding birds. Okay.
Have either of you got a copy of the book you can just hold up so that we can see? Is Ken showing it? Ken, just say something because I can't see you.
Yeah, that's me. That's the book.
Okay. That's the book to get, and it's amazing that you managed to get it printed, or should I say get an offer, but we'll talk about that shortly. I want to ask you both a very quick question before we end our session today, each. And the question is, if you could be anywhere in this world right at this given moment, where would you be? Starting with you, Ken.
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. Impossible to answer.
I'll take your first answer.
Quick answer. I'd love to be in South America looking at the hummingbirds.
Okay. And Vic, sorry?
If it was at this time of year, I'd pick the island of Iona or the Swiss Alps. But as it's November, I would probably go for Gibraltar Point, and I would be enjoying the huge wader flocks which move backwards and forwards at high tide. Thousands of knot and godwits and curlews and plovers, an incredible sight and sound.
Fantastic. Zoomers, just to let you know that we've got a couple more in conservation with scheduled for between now and the end of the year, but there'll be more because people are a bit slower this time around actually responding and actually getting it all together. But on Monday, the 29th of November, we've got a young lady who goes by the name of Quesia X, and she was born and raised in inner city London. And she's got an incredible story. I mean, at one point she was actually homeless, but she has always been interested in nature, and she had a fortuitous invitation to Peru, to the Amazon, and it's turned her life around, and she's now committed to getting people in inner city areas interested in nature. So that'd be a very interesting conversation coming up on Monday. And on December the 2nd, a guy called Eric Eaton, who's written a book about wasps, will be talking about wasps. So a couple of things to look forward to. I can also say now that we will hopefully be having the godfather of bird fairs on fairly quickly to talk about the history and the future of bird fairs. So watch out for that. That should hopefully, I'm actually in mid-negotiation with him now. Hopefully that might happen next week really quickly. So look out, keep an eye on the website. One other thing to say is that if you want to see the Q&As for all the In Conservation Withs, all you need to do is become a member of the Urban Bird World community. And today I'm offering anyone watching who's not a member to have a discounted membership for a year, and all you have to do, Claire will write the code down in the chat, but all you need to do is mention that code when you actually join, and you become a silver member for the price of a bronze. That's £20, 20 English pounds, or equivalent for the whole year. And for that, you get not only access to In Conservation with Q&As, but also there's going to be a new Zoom thing happening as of December, whereby we talk to I talk to urban birders or people actually involved in urban birding in terms of science or whatever. There'll be one guest a month, and it's just for members. So do that, it'd be great. And plus there's loads of discounts and on products, birding products and services, and lots of other freebies. So that's the plug for the Urban Birder World membership. Guys, Vic and Ken, it's been so quick. We could have been talking all night regarding ringoozles. But thank you both, and congratulations. I'm sorry I haven't got a copy to hold up now, but congratulations on the feat you've achieved. So well done, and congratulations, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and Zoomers, thank you very much for tuning in as ever, and I wish you well, and don't forget to keep looking up.